Hi, my name is Sarish Sudhakaran, and in this video, we'll analyze the cinematography of the immortal Gregg Toland, Lord of Cinematography. I've made more than 30 videos in the cinematography series, and the only other video as long as this was about Sven Nykvist. But to put things into perspective,
The one I really was inspired on, that was Gregg Toland. And I saw all his films, and I remember the first one, that was The Long Voyage Home.
a lot of people have asked me who my favorite cinematographer is. The first one I ever made is my second favorite. Gregg Toland is miles, no, make it light years above that. If I made a video about your favorite cinematographer and you want to be like them, then Gregg Toland is the cinematographer they want to be like, even after they became great. In a whirlwind career brutally cut short by his demise at the young age of 44, he lensed at least 50 movies. He was nominated for 6 Oscars and won once. The goal of this modest video is to break down his technique so you have a starting place to learn more about his work. Since this is a special video, I've also got a special treat. For all my patrons on Patreon, I'll publish my notes and references, all my research and clippings for this video as a free PDF file. And for those pledging $5 or more, in addition to the above, I also publish all the extra insights I couldn't fit into this video, plus a full list of films in the order of the edit so you know which movies they're from. Every artist uses the efforts of those before to advance their art. Photographers borrowed from painters, cinematographers borrowed from photographers. In that respect, Gregg Toland isn't the founding father of cinematography. There were scores of cinematographers before him that laid the foundations of this great craft. As an analogy, if the founding fathers of cinematography are as great as the founding fathers of the USA, then Gregg Toland is Lincoln. In other words, without him, things wouldn't have got done the way it did, and we would have all been the more poor for it. His authority over cinematography was complete, and if you want to learn from one and only one cinematographer, then Gregg Toland is your man. For simplicity's sake, we can divide his career into 3 stages. An artist grows, expands, sharpens his skills with every passing project, and it is especially enlightening to see Toland's journey in such a short period. There's the formative years, then the golden period from 1935 to 1941, and finally the late period. He was trained as an electrical engineer, but began his career as an office boy at Fox Films when he was only 15. By 1926, at age 22, he was already a camera assistant. He worked long days and stayed back when everybody else left. His dedication ensured he was one of the highest paid assistants in the studio. There are many projects uncredited but attributed to him, or at least in which he had a not so inconsequential hand. He owed immensely to the guidance of George Barnes, who probably influenced Toland in deep focus photography as well. We'll get to that. In only 5 years, Toland landed his first solo feature as a cameraman, Palmy Days. He made 4 or 5 movies a year and worked at a relentless pace. Unfortunately, he took to smoking and drinking, and he walked around with a stoop, like a burdened man only ignited by his work. If you study his early work, you'll see he tried to stick within the norms of his time: soft focus, shallow depth of field, simple compositions at eye level or from above. He worked on whatever was handed to him. It's astonishing to note he worked on 17 movies in this period, from 1931 to 1935. You do the math. In 1935, we moved to the golden era with the watershed film Les Miserables, for which he won his first nomination. In just a few short years of daily wizardry, this master transformed into a grandmaster. What was different about Les Miserables? If you study the 2 prior films, The Wedding Night and Forsaking All Others, you'll see he still used shallow depth of field and high-key lighting, soft focus, and so on. But in Les Miserables and Public Enemy No. 1, also shot in the same year, the shadows have become darker. He begins to use a strong black, which also becomes a compositional element in the frame. In this film, he used only 2 or 3 lights, and in many scenes just lit the walls and kept people in the shadows. This is where he started testing the limits of his skill, thereby expanding it. He wasn't afraid to put faces in the dark, You can also see an increase of depth in the frames. It's clear he was a lot more confident in his compositional abilities from here on out. It takes a great deal of compositional awareness to pull off deep focus photography in feature films. Nowadays, the trend is for shallow and super shallow depth of field, which obliterates the background, so you don't have to worry too much about distracting elements in the background. Gregg Toland hated that. He believed a master cinematographer needn't resort to shallow photography, simply because he has the skills to do better, and he should exercise those skills. This paradigm shift wasn't temporary or experimental either. In the next movie, Mad Love, you can see the return of the shadows and black as a strong compositional brush, a brush he was committed to paint with for everything. He repeated his deep compositions in Splendor, and now you can see him going for low-angle shots as well. Low-angle shots were a no-no in those times, simply because the sets never had any ceilings. You wanted them open to let light in, and for audio. The entire studio system was designed around the construction of sets. For exteriors, they either made do with their own grounds or with devices like front and back projection or matte paintings. Shooting on location was rare and only really gained popularity with the French New Wave, a couple of decades later. Coming back to Toland, he was particularly proud of his work on The Dark Angel and These Three. It's interesting to see how he could mix the needs of the Hollywood system with his own style. In The Dark Angel, you also begin to see the genesis of his own brand of atmospherics. He could deliver whatever was asked of him, which is probably the best definition of a cinematographer if there ever was one. With The Road to Glory, he unleashed even more atmospherics. Creating a mood or atmosphere is as old as cinematography, so it was a unique blend of decisions that sets him apart. The use of smoke or haze, deep, dark shadows, and bright highlights, strong and geometric compositions, the consistent use of the low angle, and of course the transition to wider lenses. At the beginning of this video, I said there were other cinematographers before Toland who deserve mention as well. One of them is the great James Wong Ho. I don't know if it's true, but Ho disapproved of Toland's work. He thought it was pushed to extremes. A great point of comparison is Ho's work in The Rose Tattoo, similar in theme and scope, but you can see how different their approaches are to shadow, lenses, and composition. Gregg Toland's work was pushing the envelope back then, and his frames look effortlessly beautiful. It is such subtle differences that differentiate great cinematographers. You like one or the other for their subtleties. The reason why I consider Gregg Toland to be the greatest cinematographer ever is because he did so many things so well, and he pushed the boundaries to such extremes that his movies today are not an eyesore. Some would say he was a trendsetter. He could see the future, perhaps. I say he created it. Take a movie like Come and Get It, with deep and gorgeous frames, full of haze and atmospherics. Another cinematographer would have just breezed through it. Toland went in all guns blazing. You couldn't stop him from creating art. The style of lighting in this movie is as modern as it gets, even 2/3 of a century later. You could say he was slowly inventing film noir. In Beloved Enemy, you can see every trick in the book. Study how he composes his frames and the depth in them. He signed every movie with his unique signature, with light. He was so in the zone, you can see how he tried to saddle both worlds with History is Made at Night. On the one hand, we have a Gordon Willis kind of style, except this movie came out when Willis was only 6. On the other hand, you can see the soft focus and shallow depth of field that was expected of him once in a while. Studio executives, like toddlers, need reassuring. It also shows us the introduction of a particular style of lighting singles as strong vignettes. You can see the continuation of this in Woman Chases Man. He was always pushing in degrees. The culmination of this stretch came with the next watershed movie, Dead End, for which he won his 2nd nomination. You can see his deep, rich frames simulating night. Tell me it doesn't look like anything shot today. And look at these shots from the cowboy and the lady, and tell me Toland isn't the king of darkness. He wasn't afraid to underexpose his main characters when he thought he could get away with it. By this point, he was already one of the highest paid cinematographers in the industry. Greatness was expected of him. And he delivered 2 knockout blows in succession, Wuthering Heights and Intermezzo. He won his first and only Academy Award for Wuthering Heights. Lots of candlelight effects and waving heather, swirling snow and mist. There's a story about Intermezzo that cinematographers might find useful. He was conducting tests to light the great Ingrid Bergman, and he wasn't happy with the results. In order to build trust with her, he got her to remove her makeup completely, and then asked her to apply her natural makeup. This was the basis for her look throughout the movie. In those days, the star system prevailed. Today it's a toss-up between the star system, visual effects, and comic book heroes. But back then, it was just the stars. It was a matter of life and death to assure the stars are going to look good, even when they were not supposed to. One of the things that came up in my research was that Gregg Toland wasn't particularly popular amongst actors. After all, the vain don't want to remain in the shadows. But it's not clear to me how he could have survived and thrived in the Hollywood system without making the stars look good. His cinematographic greatness was recognized in hindsight. Most of his methods, which might not surprise you today, were actually avant-garde and too out there for the time. He was taking big risks with his style as is. The last thing he could afford to do was make his actors look bad. So of course he made them look good. Even when they were in the shadows, they looked good. Even with deep focus and less makeup, they looked gorgeous. Sometimes it takes decades to separate the pretenders from the real deal. Gregg Toland took classes in costume design and makeup to improve his knowledge. He took makeup very seriously because he realized what they don't teach you even today in film school, that it can make or break your shot. You can drum up all the cool lighting tricks at your disposal and it will still look like crap with the wrong makeup. He ensured the makeup was even on all his actors so they looked even under his lighting. There was no DI to fix these things. Frame after frame, his greatness is apparent because they're consistent in their greatness. It is said Toland photographed Anna Sten for 6 months before she faced the camera for her first movie, Nana. Here's another story courtesy David Mullen. In Ball of Fire, he wanted to see only the actress's eyes while the rest of her face was in silhouette, so he asked the makeup department to paint her face black. With Raffles, he returned to the classic Hollywood style, but only because we were due another big push. And he took cinematography to the next level with The Grapes of Wrath. I prefer the novel to the movie, but I cannot deny the movie stands on its own as a great example of filmmaking. Long before the French New Wave, here was a movie that could look as naturalistic as film could make things look. The inspiration of the natural look were photographs by Dorothea Lange, and here you can see Toland's major goal as a cinematographer, to make his images look as real as they can possibly be. That's why his cinematography stands firm even today. Once your images are true and real to the world they were created for, they will last forever. People go gaga over Stanley Kubrick's use of an f/0.7 space lens to shoot in candlelight. My dear fellow brethren, Gregg Toland shot a candle scene on film stock that had a lower ASA rating than even the cheapest DSLRs out today. He didn't even have an f/1.4 lens, let alone an f/0.7 lens. Where Kubrick had many powerful candles, Toland used just one candle. You want more comparisons to other directors? How about Kurosawa? Check out the Westerners, Horses and Shadow Play, long before Rashomon or The Seven Samurai. Actually, I've read in the original release prints of the Westerners, he resorted to enhancing the beauty of the landscapes through sepia toning and highlight tints. Did anybody whisper HDR? If you think all this is cool, you haven't seen anything yet. After this point, Gregg Toland created, in my opinion, 2 of his finest masterpieces, beginning with The Long Voyage Home. Long before Sven Nykvist's Winter Light or Persona, there was Toland's mind-numbingly atmospheric work about lonely seamen. Do you like Janusz Kaminski? Long before Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, you have an atmospheric scene in a warehouse, and backlighting. This is Gregg Toland's Shaft from the back. The Long Voyage Home is mandatory viewing if you want to study Gregg Toland. I've mentioned so many watershed movies so far, but the movie that has received the greatest scrutiny, and probably deserving of that as well, is Citizen Kane. I consider Citizen Kane the finest movie ever made. It pushed filmmaking into so many new realms, it was no wonder people didn't appreciate it at the time. Today you can only watch awestruck at the magnificent effort put in by Orson Welles and Gregg Toland. By the way, in these 2 movies, both Orson and John Ford shared credits with Gregg Toland. It's not the same thing as taking a group selfie and tagging everyone, I assure you. There's so many books and essays you can watch on Citizen Kane. It's criminal if I go into detail here. I'll link to references in the free PDF and I'll only touch upon some important cinematographic details. But first, it is important to understand what role Welles played and how much can be attributed to Toland. I've seen countless debates about this, that one had more influence than the other and blah blah. It's very clear anyone who subscribes to the argument that one had to be more influential than the other clearly has a very limited understanding of the historical contributions and relationship between the director and cinematographer. Welles made a short film, actually it's a very long film, called Too Much Johnson. Obviously he was a genius and even his first efforts are better than the best efforts of most established directors today. A few frames are of particular interest, where you can see his propensity towards deep frames. Now, was the deep focus due to Toland or Welles? If you've been paying any attention so far, you know Toland already was into deep focus, and from the short film it is obvious Welles developed a similar aesthetic. Was it a wonder then that they wanted to work with each other? From my research, I understand Welles brought the story, the blocking, and the editing, and Toland brought the cinematography. Their ideas and goals gelled so well they were able to work together in spite of their differences. Whenever something couldn't be done, Toland would take Welles aside to explain things. Most times Welles agreed, but sometimes he pushed back. He demanded his vision be brought to fruition. Classic push and pull. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? They hug. Their mutual admiration for each other is as clear as day. Toland taught Welles cinematography, and Welles allowed Toland to be the greatest cinematographer he could be. Toland was the only man who could dance the dance with Welles. Nobody else knew this number. If you want to understand the relationship between a director and cinematographer and understand where the boundaries are drawn, I cannot think of a finer and more successful example than the one these two set on Citizen Kane. Also, if you want to study one and only one movie that has everything, from a twist ending to brilliant editing to acting to camera blocking, lighting and production design to miniature set construction to visual effects, then study Citizen Kane. Man, it also had the found footage genre. Citizen Kane is the history of cinema packed into one movie. Coming back to cinematography, most interiors in Hollywood films were shot between f2.3 to f3.5. That's all the lenses were capable of in those days. Secondly, the ASA rating available was about 32, with the super sensitive negative. Can you believe that? ASA 32 was called super sensitive. If you're the type who complains about ISO 800 being too low, then isn't that a pleasant slap in the face to you? Citizen Kane was made possible through 4 important technical innovations. 1. Film stock became a little faster with the Kodak Plus X and Super XX. This gave Toland the ability to stretch to ASA 160, and he probably pushed in post as well when he needed to. 2. They were able to use a new Cooke 24mm f2 lens. The entire list of lenses used on the production, as well as their gear, is available in Orson Welles and Gregg Toland, their collaboration on Citizen Kane by Robert L. Carringer. The important innovation in this lens design was the Vard Opticoat coating that minimized internal reflection so it kept down flares while letting in more light. If you've seen Citizen Kane, you know how many times the camera was pointed at the lights directly. He also used astro lenses on this film, and even at the standard 40 and 50mm focal lengths, he was able to achieve deep focus when stopped down to f11 or f16. The third technical innovation that made Citizen Kane possible were Fresnel lights and a new twin-arc broadside lamp from Mole Richardson that threw a lot of light from a distance. This allowed Toland to light his subjects with a precision and intensity otherwise not possible with their production design. One major production design choice was to have muslin ceilings in the frame. Muslin was used so they could get audio with the booms above them. Unfortunately, this mandated they couldn't get any lights from above, so throughout Citizen Kane, the use of side lighting and Fresnels were the norm. There were other important innovations as well: the dolly crane, split diopters, a new viewfinder with a sunshade, and dimmer for the 24mm lens, and so on. Toland insisted on using his own equipment customized to his needs. His favorite camera at the time was the Mitchell BNC No. 2, and this was the fourth important innovation. He had used this camera before as well, and its ability to be thrown into tight corners in small rooms made most of the movie possible. With Citizen Kane, he took deep focus to another level. By the way, Gregg Toland called it pan focus. Today we have settled on deep focus, which is simply the way to get everything in focus in the frame. It's not easy to do with 35mm film or an equivalent sensor, but with smaller sensors nowadays it's easier to achieve. By the way, deep focus wasn't a mysterious thing no one knew about, and definitely not cinematographers. What makes Toland unique is he used a deep focus technique not as a stylistic device that popped up occasionally, but to tell a story. Here are two examples. First is when the boy's fate is being decided. You can see while everyone else is discussing his future, he remains in focus, literally the main subject, center point, and focus of the scene. In the last scene of the movie, you can see Kane's life as a floor full of collectibles, as far as the eye can see. It should be pretty obvious that deep focus works in tandem with composition. It can be more than functional. On interiors, Toland stopped down to an average of f8 and sometimes as low as f16. Obviously, this meant he had to dump a lot of light into the set. We're talking hot tungsten light here, not cool LEDs. Both in the direction and cinematography, and also in the production design, they took the hardest route possible to realize their vision. They went for long takes with complicated moves and blocking, deep focus, in-camera visual effects. Everything you can think of they achieved in one movie, the greatest movie ever made. Maybe slightly out of context, but pertinent nonetheless, is Wells's quote, "This is what separates the men from the boys." It is important to mention at this phase in his career, Toland had all the time and power in the world to experiment and create the effects he wanted before principal photography began. He would join a production 6 weeks prior to work with the production design team. He would shoot endless makeup and costume tests to get his lighting perfect. Very few cinematographers had that luxury. However, in all fairness, he earned that privilege. Toland was nominated for both Citizen Kane and The Long Voyage Home. Unfortunately, neither movie was a box office success, which is probably an understatement on one level. This takes a toll on the cinematographer too. It doesn't matter how good you are if your movie doesn't make money. As long as you need money to make art, you need to make money to make art. Toland made 2 more movies in 1941. I'm mentioning the release dates of these movies as per IMDb, but obviously the movies were shot before that. Just something to keep in mind. He made The Little Foxes and Ball of Fire, both a retreat back to the Hollywood system, but you can still see his style. He lit faces with a loop lighting style or Paramount lighting style. In those days, they mostly used hard lighting. Let's talk about another huge misconception. People think cinematographers in those days didn't know about diffusion or bounce lighting. Diffusion and bounce lighting are as old as painting and photography. In the silent era, for example Charlie Chaplin's work, they had muslin sheets above the stages so sunlight can light the set. There was no other way to get a decent exposure. The side effect of this was soft, diffused light. If you study the still photographs of many movies made in the 30s and 40s, you'll see many diffusion frames in front of the lights. The reason they didn't use it so much was because it cuts down the quantity of light. With slow stock and the rapid pace of shooting, it was just more practical to make things look good with hard light. You know you're a decent cinematographer when you can light with hard light. Soft light hides mistakes. Hard light shows people what you're really worth. One other lighting technique Toland used was the fill light from right alongside the lens. I believe he called it the Obi in tribute to Merle Oberon. Check out her Wikipedia entry to know what it means. Today, that might be similar to a 1x2 LED or KinoFlow panel, right next to the lens for an extra fill or eye light. He also attached smaller Fresnels to arms affixed to the tripod when he needed more intensity. You could see his subjects were always brighter than the background, sometimes by as much as 2 stops or more. He used negative fill and grad ND filters as well to enhance his shadow play. He was a master of the silhouette. He also had the technique of top lighting for hair, and sometimes it acted as sort of a rim light or side rim light. With caps, hats, or in cars, the light was from the side. Obviously, the contrast ratio was off the charts. He shot in black and white even though he could have chosen color for some projects. Back in the day, color projects were set aside for really big movies. Toland never had a true respect for color cinematography. He made 2 predictions about it, one right and the other totally wrong. The wrong prediction was that color would never be so controllable or natural as black and white. With DI and color grading today, you can do anything to color you can think of. Where he was right, though, was he believed black and white would always have a separate, special place, which it does. You cannot really substitute one for the other. Citizen Kane marks the end of the golden era. From 1935 to 1941, Toland lensed 25 movies, 6 Oscar nominations included. After that point, he did dabble in color. Color film back then was still in its early days, with lots of technical challenges, similar to how digital cameras looked 10 years ago. Many cinematographers thought it wouldn't amount to anything, but here we are. And today, many people scoff at high frame rates and virtual reality. We'll see. One outstanding work in color was a Disney movie he did, which is controversial for reasons unrelated to cinematography. One particular sequence you will find interesting is the beginning of the song Zippity-Doo-Dah, where the characters are bathed in yellow, long before Gordon Willis did it in The Godfather. I love Gordon Willis, by the way, and Toland was a major inspiration to him. Immediately after, there is this tremendous change in space from black to light. This was not Toland's idea, though he had to execute it. They covered the actor in cardboard to block out the light and pulled it out at the last minute. Before Who Framed Roger Rabbit or Space Jam, there was Song of the South. He also made a war movie with John Ford, which won an award for Best Documentary. He always had a few tricks up his sleeve. In The Kid from Brooklyn, you can see the genesis of Raging Bull. You can actually cut between them if you like. His last major movie is another great film, The Best Years of Our Lives. You can see how he uses reflections in glass, something quite common today. But he was a pioneer when it came to using mirrors as a compositional tool. Sadly, in his later years, he reined in his style back to where it was at the beginning of the golden era, and he brought back shallow depth of field and longer lenses. Failure had taken its toll. In A Song is Born, he shot in color. Here you can see the same lighting signature he used in black and white. It doesn't quite have the same impact, but by then he probably was just fatigued. His last movie was Enchantment, back to black and white. He used longer lenses and further deviated from the Gregg Toland style, but it still looks stunning, and he continued to utilize his mastery of deep focus composition in some seemingly innocuous shots that were anything but. Aristotle said greatness is a force of habit. Once it's in your DNA, it's who you are. Can you imagine what Toland would have done if he hadn't passed away so abruptly? Ironically, his mentor George Barnes continued to work till 1953 before he passed away too. James Wong Ho's brilliant career went all the way to 1976, and he was older than Toland. The magnitude of this loss to cinematography is incalculable. Orson Welles paid Gregg Toland the ultimate compliment.
So it was partly the great spirit of Toland, the fact that he was the greatest cameraman who ever lived and the fastest.
As a closing note to those who will listen, it is so important to go beyond the obvious, beyond your sphere of perception. There's a whole history of the world, things to be learned, wisdom to be had, if only you step beyond the boundaries of the expedient. Where we live, where we are born, we are always surrounded by walls that limit our vision and our understanding of the universe. You can live and die happily within those walls, but as an artist, you will be more fulfilled if you struggle to break down those walls and discover newer walls. There's no end to this. The exploration of life is its own reward. If you're limited by your understanding of cinematography by superhero movies or what you see on YouTube, I urge you in all seriousness to study the masters of the past. You will be amazed by the knowledge you'll inherit, by the stories you'll enjoy, and by the inspirations you will unleash. By living a life of exploration and art, you will have lived multiple lifetimes by the time you die. That is the power of cinema.